I've been wanting to make some actual comic book videos for a while. We cover a lot of comic book characters, superheroes, other stuff like that on the channel. Definitely, we've been doing that forever. But I was thinking about it, and one question I always get from people is, where do I start reading different characters? Where do I start reading Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, any of these characters? And how do I know where to go from there? Because the answers are all different. So what I wanted to do was I kind of wanted to throw my hat in the ring with this series and take a look at where you should start reading different comic book characters. And I think the first is the most obvious one, which is Batman, because even though he's not the only good comic book character, he's certainly the one that a lot of you found this channel through. He's one I'm a big fan of, and I wanted to give you some different ways to get into this character and start reading, and some alternatives maybe if you're not even that interested in comic books as well, or have other reasons why you wouldn't want to read as many. So this is not a gatekeeping episode. If you haven't read any of these things, it doesn't mean you don't know the character, but let's jump into it and take a look at where I think you should start reading Batman. Because one of the first things that I took a look at with this was actually, you're going to see me reaching down, was actually what the heart of the character was. And I think that one graphic novel that really encapsulates the heart of who Batman is Batman Year One. Now, one interesting thing to note about this is it's not only an origin story for Batman in a lot of ways, it is also an origin story for Jim Gordon as he works his way to becoming the commissioner of Gotham City. And it's also worth noting that the multiverse is a huge thing in comic books, especially DC Comics. DC, the multiverse is like their thing. They love it to death, fans love it to death. And this is not in the main continuity of Batman. This is in a separate continuity. It's in an alternate Earth, which does have its own continuity of books if you're interested. But it really starts with Batman Year One. And I believe this gives you the heart of who Batman is. It's the spirit of the character, even though it's not in the current continuity. And speaking of that, once you've read this, there's actually a very important book to read following this up, which takes place years and years later in that continuity. I'm going to be ducking down quite a bit. Your copy could look very different, but Dark Knight Returns, wow, I was going to say Rises like a complete moron, but The Dark Knight Returns is actually a very interesting novel. I have a set of this, which is a bunch of different books, but they have been compiled into just one, or you could get a multiple graphic novel set as well. The point of The Dark Knight Returns is sort of a world without Batman and what happens when he comes back years later. It really gets into what he signifies, what he represents, and sort of how criminals fear him, and how the legend of Batman, if I can ever get these back in here, it's meant to not die without him. And that's something really interesting. It's a really interesting part of the mythos that I think some people sometimes miss, is that Batman is not just Bruce Wayne. It's like what they said in the Nolan trilogy of films. Batman is an idea. It's a legend. It's a boogeyman in a way to scare criminals. So I think that this really encapsulates that. It also gets into a complicated relationship between Bruce and Clark Superman. This is not the best place to start for Superman. I will tell you, because he comes off very unlikable in this book, but you at least sort of understand where he's coming from in this one as well. So I think this is a great place to start. Now, here's the thing. Maybe you're not actually that into comic books. You're just a really nice person who stuck out this video. Or, on the other hand, maybe you are into comics, but there's a reason why you can't read many of them. Maybe you don't want to read them online, which I'm not encouraging, because a lot of people do that. Maybe you can't afford to buy the graphic novels themselves, or maybe it's something like a reading difficulty. Members of my family struggle a lot with reading. Dyslexia runs in my family. So if that is the case, there are some alternatives to both of these books that I think do the exact same thing. And that is why I am happy to actually have and be able to show the movie versions of these, which are, unlike something like The Killing Joke, these are very faithful adaptations. Now, there's going to be someone who says, no, they're not good enough. But let me counter you with this. The thing that's missing a lot from both of these is some of the internal dialogue in Batman's head. And I'm not saying that's not important. But what I am saying is that to get the heart of those stories, Year One and The Dark Knight Returns, the movies do that. And in some ways, I actually like The Dark Knight Returns movie adaptation better than better than Frank Miller's original writing of it. I think that some of the internal dialogue being cut out was actually a good thing. It makes Batman a little more mysterious. It's sort of like Blade Runner, how they just jammed a bunch of exposition in Deckard's head into some of those cuts. But in the final cut that Ridley Scott made, that's not in there. I think that this actually benefits some from that. Now, there's a couple different versions of this movie that I think it's important to point out. The one I have is the deluxe edition. This is the one I recommend you find. This is both of them, because this is actually two movies in one. It's probably about, I think, close to 3 hours of content, or 2.5-ish. This is Batman The Dark Knight Returns Part 1 and Part 2. You can get both of them separately, and it's the same exact movie. So whatever's cheaper for you, these will actually be the heart of those stories that are also the heart of Batman in a lot of ways. But there's another thing to take into account here too, which is current canon, current continuity. Maybe you, the reader, you don't need the heart of who Batman is. You don't need to know that. Maybe you want to jump right into the current continuity. Now, the current continuity is always changing. That's something to keep in mind. There have been several reality-altering events, including Dark Knight's Metal, Dark Knight's Death Metal now, Doomsday Clock, Rebirth as well, reintroducing old characters. So even though these are in current canon, certain things change over time in the DC multiverse as worlds sort of come together and split apart and things happen. And that's worth noting too. So what I'm trying to do is simplify this for you, because maybe you'll get into all that beyond stuff in terms of all the realities. Maybe you won't. But this is sort of where to start with the current canon. There's actually one issue specifically that I think really covers the current canon, the return of Bruce Wayne to Wayne Manor and sort of where it picks up from there. This is at the beginning of the New 52, and that is Detective Comics, actually issue number 0. There also is an issue 27, which gets into some origin stuff as well. Either of them is fine to read. I'm assuming you know that Bruce Wayne's parents died. Nobody can really go 10 minutes without knowing that. This doesn't cover that a lot. It really covers the time period after that, between him leaving Gotham and coming back to Gotham, which, if you are familiar with the Nolan trilogy of movies, like, say, Batman Begins, a lot of that movie, this actually covers some of those events in its own way, with different things like his training and coming back to Gotham and stuff like that. So I think this is important if you're wanting to jump into current continuity. There's a couple different places you can start now after that. I think this is one of the most accessible places to start, which is Batman, The Court of Owls. It's the New 52, Volume 1. You might be able to find this in hardcover. They're kind of getting hard to find. There are box sets that include the first 3 volumes of the New 52 Batman. What you're really looking for here is that it's written by Scott Snyder with art by Greg Capullo, and it's The Court of Owls. There is also a whole saga of owls that sort of encapsulates everything. This is where I think it's easiest to start. This sort of picks up when Batman is already established. Multiple members of the Bat family are established as well, but it's a very good jumping in point to see who Batman is as a character and where he's going from here. Now, after this, you can read pretty much the entire line. That's where I would go with it. I would read, really, if you're getting into current continuity, the entire line of Scott Snyder books. They're all very good, all the way up to the end of them, epilogue. And then there's actually follow-ups as well with Dark Knight's Metal and, Dark Knight's Metal Rising. Those are very good books to read as well with this. But there is another place you can start if you want to with the New 52 canon, and that's actually at 0 year. So this is actually, I believe it's, graphic novels 4 and 5 of the Scott Snyder run. You could technically start at 4 and 5 and then jump back to 1. This takes place before the events of the entire series. I think it benefits you to read this later on, though, because there are some hints and tie-ins to things you would have seen in novels 1 through 3. But if you're wanting more of an origin before you jump into 1, 2, and 3, and you don't care about a few of those Easter eggs and other stuff, you can jump right into these. There actually are a couple that I think this is my stopping point for you for getting you into the character, but it's Dark Knight's Metal and Dark Knight's Metal Rising. Really, you want to read Rising first, because this essentially runs through a bunch of perverse versions of Batman. This is the dark multiverse. This is also written by Scott Snyder, who is one of my favorite Batman writers of all time, actually, and one of my favorite comic book writers of all time. He also did great work on Justice League. But essentially, this book is really about the dark multiverse and sort of what could have gone wrong with Bruce Wayne's start. what could have gone wrong as he became Batman and who he could have become as a character. And it runs through all these different versions of the character that are these dark, evil-ish, or misguided versions of Batman throughout the years. This is a great one to read that sort of encapsulates who Batman is, because it shows you how our Batman turned out compared to how all these guys turned out, which is a big deal because it shows you just how things could have gone wrong and how morally incorruptible in a lot of ways the current Batman actually is. After this, there's plenty of places you can go. Tom King did start a run of Batman. I like some of it. I don't like some of it. I think people like it a lot more than I do, but it just came off different to me, and I'll leave it there because I'm not doing a review of that. But there's parts of that are really good with Catwoman and Batman tied together in the Tom King stuff after this. But after this, we start to get into really complicated universe-bending antics. So we start to get into DC Rebirth, where a character comes back that changes reality a little bit. We start to get into other things with Rebirth, with Doomsday Clock building up and ties to the Watchmen universe. We start to get into things like Dark Knight's death metal, which is reliant on Doomsday Clock to understand. So that's why I'm kind of stopping you here, depending on how much you actually like these novels. I think once you've gotten through Dark Knight's Metal, you've gotten a very good understanding of Batman as a character and a lot of the ways it could have gone wrong, a lot of the ways it did go right or did go wrong, and who he could have ended up as. So this is kind of my whole take on where you could start getting into Batman as a character. I will give you a couple of other alternatives as well, and I hope I'm not stepping on any toes here, because one alternative to reading the comics itself, even though I really do think these are important and I think they're great, another alternative is actually Nolan's Batman Begins. I think that actually gets very deeply into the core of Bruce Wayne and Batman as a character. Now, me personally, without getting too far into this, that's not my favorite rendition of Batman, but I think it goes back to that heart of who the character is, for you to actually get into and start to become a fan of. And the final one is definitely, without a doubt, it's Arkham Origins. There's really nothing I can add to this. I've done a whole Let's Play of it over on the Let's Play channel. I talk about it all the time. It has some of my favorite designs in a Batman property, and also it can get you both into the Arkham games, along with being a bridge into the greater Batman lore, because this sort of establishes how Batman got started, really. It does go into the death of his parents. It does go into him establishing himself in Gotham City. A lot of the events of Year One, this is inspired by. And this even has references to the Court of Owls from those novels that I mentioned, like the New 52, the Court of Owls, or City of Owls. There's a lot here, and you're going to see as you get into any of these properties that a lot of these Batman works reference each other in different ways. Like, oh, hey, I wouldn't have seen that the themes of Year One are in this if I hadn't read or watched the Year One movie or book. That's one of the great things about this character and this property, is that everybody writing him really seems to be a fan of him and a fan of works that came before. So there are a lot of other places that you could get started with the character. Let me know what your suggestions are in the comments down below. Was this helpful to you? Is there something more that I could do in the future that would be more helpful to you with these? Because I want to run through different characters. Some of them on the list are Spider-Man and Superman. And what other characters would you want to see for how to get into that character? I'm definitely interested. Let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this. My videos have been having a bit of a hard time lately. I don't know if there was some kind of change on YouTube, but I've noticed a lot of us in this space are kind of struggling. So just the likes, even dislikes if you don't like it, or letting me know what you think in the comments, that engagement, it means a lot to me. It helps get me in recommended, and it helps YouTube see like, oh, people actually care about this video. So hey, thank you very much. I do want to say a really big thank you. We are getting massive here. We're at almost 60,000 subscribers. We might be at 60,000 when this goes up, which is incredible and weird and surreal, and I wouldn't be where I am without you, without your interest, without you caring, and without you actually participating and being a part of this community. So in the description down below are different things like the Discord, Reddit, we have a subreddit, Patreon if you want to support in that way, Twitter, Instagram, everything down there. It means a lot to me to hear what you have to say and to be able to connect with you. I'll see you in the next one. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everybody, stay shway.